no pun intended, episode number 44. If you guys are watching on video, you can tell that Matt will not be joining me tonight. He is actually up at a concert. We tried to schedule a time where we could both make it, but just one of those weeks where we all had stuff going on. We didn't have a single night in common to be able to record, so I'm flying solo tonight. If you are from the U.S., congratulations on surviving an election season. It is done. It is behind us, and I am not even in a swing state, and I feel like I've just been bombarded with political stuff everywhere. This is actually in Minnesota, is where Matt and I are from. This is the 13th straight year that Minnesota has voted blue, and so we don't really see a ton of probably the craziness of it. So I can't even imagine what it's like to be in like Pennsylvania or Georgia right now. Fun fact: Minnesota voted in 1984 as the only state that was won by Mondale. Minnesota voted for him. Reagan won every single state except for Minnesota, which is just crazy to think that every state was in play back in the day. It was only like 40 years ago now. But I remember someone asked Reagan what he wanted for Christmas that year after the election, and he said Minnesota. So that's kind of fun. But today we are doing a miniature episode, and we are talking about GM norms and how to become an actual grandmaster. So if you're just getting started out in chess, uh, asking how to become a grandmaster is like kind of asking as a beginning runner, like how do I qualify for the Boston Marathon? It's not quick. It's not easy. And you're probably not going to make it. Honestly, you have to study your whole life. Probably have to start very young and stick with it for probably 10, 15 years. And you probably still won't get it. So let's just get that out of the way. But to become an actual grandmaster, you need to have a few things happen. So you need to get a rating above 2,500 FIDE, and B, you need to have three grandmaster norms. So we'll get into those in a little bit, but grandmaster is basically the highest title you can achieve in chess. It is a lifetime title, assuming you don't cheat or something like that, and it can never be taken away from you. There's other titles, of course, that are lower than grandmaster. So one title below that would be international master, or women's grandmaster is kind of like the equivalent of international master. And then there's FIDE master, which is the lowest FIDE title. Then if you're from the United States, there's national master, which is what MAT is, and that is a title specific to the United States that other countries don't recognize. I think other countries have their own sort of like master or titles or something like that. Okay, so how do you get to 2,500 rated? Well, you have to be very good. This is the 2,500 rating cliff to become a grandmaster. You have to be very good. One of our biggest blog posts is how to get a grandmaster norm, three keys you need to know. So I will link that in the description of this podcast if you want to read it. It's about a 5 or 6 minute read, so not that long. But I was just gonna go over that in this episode to kind of have a audio version of it, I guess. So in order to become a grandmaster, you need the rating of 2,500 FIDE rating, but you also need three norms, which I alluded to earlier. So let's go through what it takes to get a norm. So a norm is basically a very strong tournament performance. And that performance rating needs to be 2,600 or higher. So what does that mean? It basically means that you need to score an even score against players who are rated 2,600 or higher. So if you, I have a chart in this blog post, but let me just break it down for you. So let's say you're playing people whose average rating is 2,600. Then over the course of a 9 game tournament, you would need to score 4.5. So that would be an average score. So you're maybe you win, you lose, but you basically play 2,600 rated players even all throughout. You can get a grandmaster norm as long as your opponent's rating meets the minimum, which is 2,380, which would be like a little under an IM. So IMs are like 2,400. So if you play all opponents in this rating range 2380 to 2433, you need 7 tournament points out of a 9 round tournament. So tournament points, that would mean you would have 4 draws and 5 wins. So you have to play pretty well. A lot of the norm tournaments, kind of like these closed norm tournaments that you probably follow, maybe from the Charlotte Chess Center or in St. Louis, they have like their GM norms. A lot of the time, they're going to be in this next rating range, and that's going to be 2434 up to 2474. So this is mostly going to be international masters and grandmasters, maybe like an FM or two thrown in there. And in order to get a GM norm there, you need 6.5 out of 9, basically means you need 4 wins and 5 draws, or 6 wins and a draw, or something like that. We need to get 6.5 tournament points to get a norm. And I can keep bringing this up, or like going all the way down the chart, but basically, the stronger your opposition is, the fewer points you need to score in the tournament. So if you play players at 2680 or higher, this is going to be your super GM range. You need 3.5 out of 9 in order to score a GM norm. But it's not just the GM norm, actually, or it's not just the rating actually that will get you a GM norm. There's a couple other things you need to do too. So um, in uh, in addition to having a 2600 performance rating, you must also play at least 3 grandmasters in a round robin tournament, and half of your opponents have to be titled. So this is, I think, a reason why it's harder to get a norm in like an open tournament is you may just not get good pairings, and a good pairing would mean like a grandmaster. Maybe you get a very strong rated international master, and you're not even eligible for a GM norm because you need to play at least 3 grandmasters. And it's also kind of out of your control if you're not playing titled players either. Although at the high levels, I think almost everyone is going to be titled. So it makes sense that in order to become a grandmaster, you at least need to play some grandmasters, and that's going to be in a 9 round tournament. It's going to be 3 of your games, so at least a third of your opponents. Um, Another thing that you need to consider is federations. So you can't just go out and play a 9 round tournament against everyone from your same country. So FIDE put the stop to that, because there's always the potential of going to a tournament, everyone kind of colludes and says like, all right, well, this time it's Mike's turn to get the GM norm. This time it's Aaron's turn to get the GM norm. So you have to play from a wide variety. So if you're from the United States, you must play at least 2 grandmasters from separate federations, for example. So if you're from whatever country you're from, you need to play 2 grandmasters that are from a different federation than your own. And you also cannot play 3 grandmasters from the same federation to be eligible for norms. That's you can't play, like, let's say you're from the United States. You can play a maximum of 1 grandmaster, or I guess you need to play at least 2 grandmasters from another federation, and you cannot play 3 grandmasters from the same federation. So that also makes these open tournaments difficult, because you may get, let's say you're playing a tournament in Portugal or something, you may just get matched against 3 Portuguese GMs, and you meet all the requirements for a GM norm, but your GM federations aren't diverse enough, and so that wouldn't count either. So you need to play a diversity of opponents, specifically in your grandmaster opponents. So keep this in mind when you see the pairings for these closed round robin tournaments. I know Levy Rosman, Gotham Jess himself, is trying to become a GM norm. Just take a look at the list of players, and you'll see GMs from different federations just to fulfill this requirement, basically. Um, there's a couple gotchas too, or maybe like little boosts that can help. So in a GM norm tournament, you can round up one of your opponent to a rating of 2200. So if you get paired again in the first round, let's say against a player rated maybe like 1800, it's going to be so hard to bring the average from 1800 all the way up to like 2380. That's like a 500, almost a 600 point gain there. So you can inflate that to 2200. So if you beat a player very low rated, it's not going to count against you super negatively. Um, Another thing, I think I mentioned this at the top, but your average opponent rating must get to be 2380 or higher. If it's lower, then you're not eligible for a norm at all, even if you score 9 out of 9. So that is one boost in these open tournaments where often you will get pared down in the first round. So maybe you're like 2400, your first opponent may be like 1920 or something like that. You get to count that 1920 as a 2200, which is kind of like free rating when you think about it in terms of the GM norm. Okay, so another thing that makes these GM norm tournaments eligible is a norm tournament must be at least 9 games total. If you want to be advantageous, you can play a 10-round tournament, and when you do that, you get an extra bonus chance because you could count rounds 2 through 10 instead of 1 through 9 for your norm. So let's say you have a bad loss in round 1. Your tournament's not over, your norm run isn't over as long as you can have a very strong performance in rounds 2 through 10. And this also works in reverse. So if your first 9 rounds you have a GM eligible norm in those 9 games, and let's say you lose your 10th game, you are still eligible for a GM norm in those first 9 games. I am pretty sure, I don't have this written down in the blog post, but I am pretty sure that to become a grandmaster, one of your tournaments needs to be in a tournament with like longer than 5 days, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of, or maybe longer than 6 days or something like that. I need to double check on that rule. But so you can't just kind of like blitz out 3 games in one day and have that count as a norm. All right, and that is what it takes to become a grandmaster. So let's review. So you need to get your FIDE, your total FIDE rating above 2500. And I believe this can be a live rating. So let's say you reach 2500 in round 8 of your tournament, and then you lose in your last round. That could still make you eligible for a grandmaster if you have that live rating at 2500 plus, even if you don't finish the tournament with that rating. Okay, so that's a 2500 rating. For the norms, you need to get 3 norms. You need to play very well, obviously. You need to have 3 performance ratings of at least 2600 against grandmasters that are from different federations and not your own federations. If you do that 3 times with the performance and with the total FIDE rating of 2500, overall FIDE rating, then that is what it takes to become a grandmaster. So 3 things. It is a little finicky, and there's a lot of small rules. If you want to go over this again, you can listen to this podcast again if you'd like, or I will link the blog post in the description, and hopefully that will help you out too. All right, guys, that is going to do it for this episode. Like I said, Matt is out hanging out at a concert, and so I'm going to make this a little shorter. We call these miniatures. So if you enjoy this type of thing, please give us a like or a rating on Spotify. That really helps us. We've been seeing pretty good growth on the podcast very steadily throughout the year, and we appreciate you all for that. And as always, thank you for supporting Chess Goals, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.